Hello, this is Echelon's Turning Point, a festival of ideas for a Sri Lanka that is turning the corner. And today we're discussing the intersection of artificial intelligence, human values, and happiness.
Today, if you look at the traditional AIs, were built on value. So in the open AI, value has become a secondary thing. You're building algorithms where you're saying, let people see what they could use it for. The whole objective there in open AI model is, in the algorithms, the subjectivity tends to get eliminated. Models like BART or even Copilot of Microsoft's or ChatGPT, the algorithms to an extent is unbiased in terms of how it had been trained. Then when we build on it, we also need to be careful the data that we ingest to utilize that gets nuanced in terms of what we want to do and doesn't get biases as well.
With us in the studio is Ramesh Shanmuganathan. Ramesh is Executive Vice President and CIO at John Keells Holdings, and he is also the Chief Executive of John Keells IT. Ramesh Shanmuganathan, always great pleasure to have you with us, and thanks for joining Turning Points. Right?
Likewise, Ramendra. Yeah.
Let's start here. Iterative open AI models are disrupting work and life in general, right? How does one deal with this disruption and ensure that the average human being benefits from it? Like, are we anywhere close to so-called singularity?
Much has been spoken about AI and singularity and utopia. I think the whole conversation today is about inclusivity. Is it AI for the privileged or is it for everyone? Right. I think that's where whether it kind of disrupts an average person versus it kind of really helps an average human being becomes a reality or not.
Sure.
Right. I think to that extent, I think if you really look at what OpenAI is brought about is it has really broken the barriers in terms of affordability of AI to an average person.
Right. Open AI, what you're referring to is what we also commonly call ChatGPT here.
ChatGPT, yes, right. Yes. Earlier, AI was very prohibitive, even for corporations, because of the investments, one, the skill sets, moving up the value chain in terms of just doing number crunching versus predictive analytics based on past patterns, two, building intelligence for future, right? I think, and that's why you would have seen the so-called supercomputer of the last decade. Where a computer beat Garry Kasparov in chess, the weather forecasting, oil exploration. So those were actually problems which were solved by supercomputers, because the computing power and the data volumes that you ingest is huge. So today, you and I don't look at the complexity of what's behind, but we avail of ChatGPT as if going into internet and searching for something, right? So that is how simplistic it has become, because the complexity got masked, and because of the open source community and the collaborative efforts of the open source community, it has made things affordable for an average person. I think that's where the power of AI needs to be looked at, rather than, I would say, if you're a pilot, you will look to your co-pilot not as a threat, right? You say a co-pilot is there because obviously I can't be focused on this throughout the flight, but he's there to help. So I would always think AI as a co-pilot for a human being in whatever he or she wants to do. That collaborative equation is what we need to look at each and every role, each and every persona. Then it becomes useful. Say for a student, AI should be looked at as a co-pilot, as a tutor, right? A 24/7 tutor who's always there with the student. So for a person who is doing programming, again, I would know so much, but if I get stuck, I can even look at AI as a co-pilot and say, how do I crack this problem, right? So it's not lock, stock and barrel saying, hey, I don't want to study. Now you do my homework, you pass my exams, right? I think that's where the ethical usage and the whole collaborative side of things is, in terms of the strictures of what do I use it for, why, how. If I say, like, you take US for example, right? Weapons are available to be bought if you have a license. But what do you use it for? Whether self-defense or you just go per second, but shoot people around, is not governed by the technology or the weapon, right? It's a user, right? So I think ultimately the responsibility is not only on the part of who's creating it, the person who's using it as well. I think that's where I feel a lot more soft aspects of governance, ethics, the culture, and how do we condition what gets made and how it gets used. I think that's where I feel the greater benefit will dawn to the masses if we can manage that whole life cycle.
Sure. In my question, I mentioned singularity, but I think maybe at this point it may be worthwhile to sort of define some of these things that
Sure.
we sort of use somewhat loosely and interchangeably.
Yes.
There's artificial intelligence, there's super intelligence, we're talking about
Yeah.
singularity. What are these? Can you sort of
Yeah.
simplify?
So I think the whole concept of artificial intelligence, as I said, has been around for more than 3-4 decades, right? Because as I said, it was used for very specific purposes. That's what I would call as narrow intelligence. It was built to serve a single use case.
Sure.
So your artificial narrow intelligence is when you build AI to solve a singular problem, right? Then you get on to artificial general intelligence, where you're looking at the same platform being used for multiple use cases. So today ChatGPT has evolved into artificial general intelligence, but touching on the super intelligence to the extent to which it can create original content. So which is like, you can think of its own, it has its own brain.
Sure.
Right? So when you talk about artificial super intelligence, is how much of a human brain is it mimicking?
Sure.
Or you're saying it's indistinguishable. I don't know whether this is done by a human being or is it done by a computer. So you can't distinguish between the two. Because you're saying it is as good as a human being, right? But so when you talk of singularity, you're saying a machine will either match or supersede a human's capability, right? And it's not the case today. Because if you look at from an analytical point of view, from a knowledge point or inference point of view, it is there. But if you look at the emotive side, the motor skills, the kind of ethical side, it's far, far away, right? I think that's where I think I was just thinking through, some examples to quote. Now you take a cricket match, right? Someone appeals whether this is out or not. But then you go back to reviewing the video footage, and ultimately that video footage is giving you more abstract data, but the final decision is made by a human being, third umpire.
Sure.
Right? But even then it's made by third umpire. There are people, 40,000 spectators, who may not agree or disagree. Right? So the feel-good factor is, even if the data is the same set of data, given to two set of people, the outcomes and decisions could be different. Because it is also conditioned by what you believe is right or wrong, and what you believe did happen or not. Right? So I think that's where the whole interpretation becomes a subjective element. Right? I think that's where I think singularity will also depend on the person. Now say, I can say this is as good as a human being. Someone who is with a superior intellect saying, no, it's not.
Sure.
I can do better. So that viewpoint is bit kind of generalistic statement. And as I say, singularity, I don't think we are anywhere close to it. At least we are 30-40 years away in terms of really mimicking the capability of a human being in its entirety.
Sure.
But in bits and pieces, we will.
It's interesting that you should bring it up, because these large language models, the artificial general intelligence that you're talking about, right, are trained on available data, publicly available data.
Yes.
Most of the time, right? As societies, as individuals, as communities, we are all biased in some way. And there's then that added dimension that some societies that are perhaps more resource rich will produce a disproportionately large set of data compared to others who don't have the bandwidth or the resources to do this, right? So this data that is informing the large language models, the so-called AI general intelligence, is already biased and skewed.
Yes.
Does this pose a danger to society in general that is then using the outcomes from these, and for us in poorer countries where we have a data deficit?
True. I think it's an interesting point, and also I think since you brought data as a kind of a foundational point for discussion, so there are 5 elements when you talk about big data, right? It's about the volume of data that you're trying to ingest into a model, then the velocity, at what speed is the data changing,
Sure.
then the variety, whether it's structured, semi-structured, unstructured. Then you're also talking about veracity, the quality of data. Is the integrity of data, right? Then when you and the value that it brings. It so actually then, so today if you look at the traditional AIs were built on value. Do I have a business case for investing this? So in the open AI, value has become a secondary thing, right? So you're building algorithms where you're saying let people see what they could use it for, right? So the whole objective there in OpenAI model is in the algorithms, the subjectivity tends to get eliminated. Like the language models, like if you look at either BART or even Copilot of Microsoft's or ChatGPT, the algorithms to an extent is unbiased in terms of how it had been trained. Then when we build on it, we also need to be careful the data that we ingest to utilize that gets nuanced in terms of what we want to do and doesn't get biases as well. So if you look at even ChatGPT 3 when it got launched, there were huge negative case studies also, because for a large model like that to understand, if I type saying, now how do I make a bomb out of RDX? Should I respond to this or not? Right? Now how do I poison this guy? So the whole issue is AI, for you and I, the way we've been brought up, we know this is a good question to answer, or do I avoid it, or right? So obviously,
Depends on the person
exactly,
also. Like,
exactly.
is this guy
Exactly.
about to
So
commit
AI
a
wouldn't
crime
know
or
that.
is just
So
curious?
AI wouldn't know that. AI would think, hey, this guy is asking an answer. I have a database which says how to make an RDX, and I don't care. This 3-year-old kid is asking me how to make a bomb. So that's ethics, right? So that kind of a thing, if you don't train the model on the negativity as well, wouldn't know, right? So again, then it boils back to, can a model, when a kid in front of your computer is logging into ChatGPT and asking this question, does it know who's asking the question? So then it boils back to the digital identity. So you cannot protect a person in terms of responses also unless that person is profiled. So that is why it's important when AI gets kind of pervasively used, it's important to understand the digital identity of the person and the persona who's using it, so that appropriate response could be given.
So are you suggesting then that our interaction with AI and we as human beings are built on morals, values, those are the foundational things of society, right? Is our interaction then with AI going to be sort of determined by how good our digital identities are? So digital identities
That'll
have
be
to
foundational, I would think.
right.
Because for me, if you're trying to govern something, right? You now say, for example, if I will enact a law in this country, right? So today, if everyone is law-abiding, you won't need enforcement, you won't need courts, you won't need police, everything, right? So we can't expect that from AI either, right? Because AI is a platform. Then we are saying, okay, there are people who will use it for the right purpose, we will maybe use it for not so right. Then how do you govern? How do you bring in ethics into that whole thing? Now, say for example, in the next decade or so, I am sure the entire education system is going to change. So if I am saying, okay, I have given homework to this kid, and you can use AI as a co-pilot, do it, get assistance, but ultimately it has to be original. But how will I then confirm that if I don't have an identity to validate that, right? So this is where I'm just saying, digital identity will, like India is far ahead with Aadhaar and all these things. That is what is going to fuel the next wave of growth, and for AI becoming not as an enemy of a human, but as an aid. How do you coexist, right? The question that we have to ask is, how do we make AI coexist with every human being and help him or her live a better life, right? Healthcare, education, maybe personalization, maybe even plan better in terms of what you're doing, what you're spending, all of that stuff, right? So I think that's where I feel there is a whole load of opportunity, but digital identity would become foundational to ensure that AI gets personalized.
Sure. So hang on, Ramesh, right? You also delineated this. You talked about how society. I mean, while we value morals and values, society also has this infrastructure of laws, regulations, policing, judgment, right? It is not merely a digital identity
Yes,
that does that.
exactly.
So are you suggesting then that we may need foundationally, yes, digital ID, but more infrastructure on top of it
Exactly.
to make sure?
So if you draw parallels with the, say, what I took on as a example, now you take the legal system, right? So if a person is to file a case, he needs to have an identity, right? Then it goes back to your birth certificate or NIC or a passport, right? So today juvenile courts exist because up until 18 you don't have an identity, right? So then the guardian or the parent becomes the custodian, right? So similarly, so today that's why I'm saying, if you draw a parallel in the digital world, whatever happens, you need to first be able to identify who is the use of this knowledge base, right? And how is it being used. To govern how is it being used, you have to profile the person, right? So that you can bring those mitigatory measures, right? So if a 3-year-old kid is asking for something, then I need to, like you say in the internet, parents go and control. You can put the software and say, okay, my kid is 3 years, don't put sexually explicit content, don't do violence, don't block those. So AI also can be coached to do that, but then you have to profile the person. A parent can't be sitting in front of the computer and doing it, because today AI can be accessed on any device, right? So I think that's where the whole governance mechanism can be brought in. If you profile the persona and say, this persona is 0 to 5, this persona is allowed to use AI for education, these things, then there's better protection and better governance and better ethics in terms of how it's being used, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm getting to. I'm just saying, if we don't evolve, when AI kind of is in our face, it'll be too late for us to now say, now we need to put all of these to, govern. It'll be too late.
In some
They
ways,
open the
AI,
floodgates.
in some ways, AI perhaps is already in our face, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I think the prevalence of deep fake technology, malicious use. I mean, we haven't got to digital IDs in Sri Lanka at least yet, and certainly not the other regulatory structures. But we are having to deal with this. How does society deal with this transition? I mean, it looks like we are all behind
So
the evolution.
today, I think the better way would be to look at platforms which have these kind of things built in, right? So that you also, when AI content gets in, even to detect malicious content and all of that, the AI could be used for that as well. So you got to start building safeguards using AI as well, because human intervention will not solve it, right? So if you're deploying something kind of forward thinking, you also need to make sure the controls also in play with the same technology. Now, even cyber. So say, for example, someone hacks into my knowledge base and puts data which biases the outcome, inference. Right? So you need to ensure your security schemas also aligned to, so that someone who is not supposed to have access to your knowledge base is accessing it and tweaking it to give inferences which are not right. Right? So I think that's, especially say in pharmaceuticals, in medical field, healthcare, it can have drastic consequences, right? So I think that's where, because I think there's this whole debate about COVID as well, where the vaccines were, the right ones at the right choice, but did we take the wrong choice because of we didn't have enough data, inference points, and if all these inferences in terms of when you inject the symptoms got fed into an AI engine, I'm sure there could have been better outcomes, right? But sometimes that knowledge is not shared. So what knowledge should be shared across for the general benefit of the masses versus not is also subjective assessment of a human being. It's not made by AI, right? So I think that's where I feel there has to be more international collaboration as well at a regional level, NGOs, governments, so that this becomes a collaborative platform for the bigger, greater good of humanity.
So your input on how AI can essentially enhance human well-being and happiness is based on also you're going to that principle of we need to collaborate, right? Are you optimistic that we can get to some utopia with AI?
I'm not optimistic about utopia, but I feel it'll definitely yield a better outcome for an average human being. Because a couple of things. Digital divide. I feel with increasing people having access to electricity, to internet, to computing, I feel at a fraction of the cost, you're able to leverage a lot more with AI that you wouldn't have. Right? If you take today, even in the last 1 year, everywhere I go, people talk about my kid is using this to learn new things. He is doing homework better. He seems more interested in the subject. So a lot of positive vibes about what ChatGPT in general is being used for, and everyone is using it. So today you go to a conference and ask who has not used ChatGPT, very few hands doesn't go up, right? So the whole hype and the adoption seems to be pretty high. So that's why I feel that enthusiasm should not get killed by negative vibes about AI is going to kill jobs and kill humanity. I think it needs to get managed, right? Because like anything, say even today, if you talk of drugs, that has the worst impact on humanity, but who's controlling it, right? So the whole issue, we draw a parallel with what's happening around this world. I think AI is nowhere close to destroying humanity, right? But if we really put the guardrails and allow AI to be used, I feel average human being will be definitely better off. So in my sense, utopia is that not that everyone is going to have a hunky-dory life, but at least your quality of life in terms of what you're doing with what you have could get better.
So you're talking about guardrails and you're talking about collaboration to make, as a condition to make AI useful for everybody, to improve lives across for everybody, right? Apply this to Sri Lanka's current context. We are not leading edge in terms of regulating these things, figuring out where the guardrails should be and how we're going to do that. What are possibly one or two steps that we can take from where we are today?
I think primarily I would think in terms of even public sector or private sector, I feel the technology adoption could be fast tracked, right? So because today, if you look at, if you were to do something like this, you would have to build your own infrastructure, hire people, all of that stuff. So today, you have a opportunity to leapfrog, right? Now, most companies and most countries have built their own infrastructure, so to speak, right? But here, we are probably, it's a benefit, like what happened in when we adopted mobile technology, right? We leapfrog from wired to wireless, and we had the highest penetration because we were late to enter the market. So same opportunity we would have as Sri Lanka, because if you had to build something so late in the day, we can obviously leapfrog and not build that and start using this with cloud, AI, all this stuff. So you don't have to invest much money in building those. You can start using it and help the country and the citizen to leapfrog. I think that's where I see the biggest opportunity. Rather than, we're trying to now follow someone else who has walked that entire 9 years, we can say, I don't want to. I'll just do the last mile. Still be at the same starting line in terms of the AI journey, right? That opportunity is there for us. So I feel we need to really look at that rather than saying, I'm not there to use AI, right? It's a mindset which is a huge blocker.
Anything you want to add in the larger context of what?
So I think the main thing I would also wanted to kind of touch base was in terms of, since you alluded to about Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, I think, is in a unique phase. I know because we're coming out a lot of challenges and looking at opportunities to leverage ourselves. I think we have a pretty good talent pool, and I think with all these kind of settings coming in, I always felt Sri Lanka should kind of position ourselves. I think in the early interview I mentioned this also, as an innovation hub in terms of driving the future, right? I think that's where I feel we also need to start creating an entrepreneurial ability in people who can use this kind of technology to leapfrog to the next level and collaborate with multinational organizations and regional hubs so that we can build that bridge. Because that's why I feel there's a huge opportunity for us to align with India in terms of the kind of phenomenal growth that they're going through. I feel in another 5 years they will beat Germany as economy. I feel there is a huge rub-on effect that we could probably garner, like what Hong Kong or out of China or Mexico or out of US, I think we should really wake up to that opportunity as well, and see how technology could kind of be the glue which could bring these countries as a next phase of growth.
Ramesh Shanmuganathan, always a riveting conversation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me here.